Welcome to Working Wisdom with Dr. Kevin Sansberry, the show where we distill the invaluable lessons learned on our mission to detoxify workplaces. In this show, we don't just explore theories, we engage in thought-provoking conversations with experts and influential leaders. Together, we'll unearth the strategies, practices, and wisdom that can elevate you and positively impact your organization. Get ready to gain actionable insights from the very best in the field. Here's your host, Dr. Kevin Sansberry.
Hello. It's Dr. Kevin Sansberry. Welcome to Working Wisdom. Gonna have a great conversation today. A lot of folks that I work with are surprised when I tell them I'm an introvert, and I'm certified in Myers-Briggs, and so I know for like a fact I'm introverted. And they have this thing where it shows you like why you're introverted and how. And I'm apparently an expressive introvert. I have no idea what that means, but that's kind of how I show up. And so today's conversation will be about introverted leadership. And, what are some of those things we should look for in introverted leaders? What's the superpower there? Effectiveness, and the like. We'll kind of go through all of that today. And so the guest on the show is Terrence Lee. And I met Terrence on Instagram, and Terrence has been a past guest of the show. And so I'm super excited to invite him here because I think, you all will learn a lot from his wisdom. He's, phenomenal in his work. And I think like you'll be able to enjoy the insights that he has, especially as we think about the differences between extroversion and introversion and leadership. So let's invite Terrence onto the show. What's going on? How you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm excellent. I'm happy to be able to connect with you again since our last podcast episode that we did on introversion and toxic leadership. So tell folks a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Terrence Lee, aka the Introvert Leader. Definitely excited to be on today. So with my platform, I help people with introverted personalities to embrace themselves and grow into their full potential. So I like to start a little bit with just the beginning for me. So when I was a kid, I was very loud when I was young because we moved around a whole lot. And I wanted to be noticed and make friends. And when I was at the age of 13, I had an experience with a choir director where basically I started singing one day and she yelled at me in front of the rest of the kids in the choir, slammed the piano cover down while doing it, and told me to stop singing in front of everybody. And at that time, I loved to sing. I loved to write songs. I used to carry around notebooks where I'd have all my songs and poems and things I used to write. And after that day, I completely stopped writing. I really shut down. I stopped speaking up in class when I knew the answers. And that carried into adulthood. It's something that I didn't realize until a few years ago, how deeply it affected me. But I really went internal and I just wouldn't speak up. And it wasn't until in my career, I'm in the engineering, aerospace and defense field, and a few people started to tell me that they saw leadership potential in me, which I didn't know who they were talking about because I'm like, clearly you're not talking about the quiet guy that doesn't speak up in meetings. But they told me that, and I started to get opportunities to lead. And my first leadership position went very well. From there, it's just gone up. So I've continued to advance in my career. But using my introversion as a strength. And so that's the thing that a lot of people, I feel like, don't realize, because a lot of people in society can view introversion like it's a weakness somehow. So with my platform, I'm all about helping fellow introverts to not only embrace their introversion, but learn how to use it to their advantage and as a strength.
Thank you for sharing that. And that notion of like the introversion, when you speak with people who are introverted, who ask you, how did you become a leader, or what do how did you do it? What tools or tips do you give them when they have that self-doubt? Because society actually, the workplace at least, is kind of an extroverted design, And so what tips do you give them to like get out of that mindset or that mental model of I can't be a leader?
Yeah, great question. So it's a few things with that. So the first thing, everybody says, be yourself, right? Like a lot of self-help gurus and books are like, oh, just be yourself.
Yep.
Well, what does that actually mean? So when I'm talking to people, when I say be yourself, I like to really get a little deeper. So, authentically, who are you, right? Like when you're being your authentic self and you're stepping into your authentic self, what does that look like? And what I discovered with myself was that authentically, I think a lot better when I'm by myself or in smaller groups as opposed to large group settings. I'm a lot more productive that way. I also realize that when I'm around people over a long period of time, after a while, I may need to take a break because I need to recharge, right? So there are certain things that you begin to know about yourself and
Hmm.
realize. And when you accept those things for what they are and you don't try to change yourself into something that you're not, that alone is huge. So that helps with becoming a leader because now you're able to authentically be who you are. The
Mm.
next thing, and I think this is very big, and this can sometimes be tough for us introverts because we can go into our shell and want to do things on our own sometimes, but the importance of mentorship. One of the things that helped me a lot in my leadership journey was I've had some amazing mentors, like the people that I talked about earlier when I, mentioned that some people told me they saw leadership potential in me. Those are people that ended up becoming my mentors. And the reason mentors are so important is they've already been down the path, they've already bumped their head, they've already made the mistakes. And so they're able to help show you, hey, I did this before, so you probably don't want to do that. Or I did this thing that worked, so why don't you do that, right? As opposed to trying to figure it out yourself. So
Hmm.
I think just being authentically you, but also having mentorship, people that you can lean on, are two things that help a lot with growing as a leader.
Yeah. I like how you flipped the be yourself. Because a lot of people do the be yourself to conform into something somebody wanted you to be. And
Right.
right. And so I like that you really said, look at your values, look at what fills your cup essentially. Um, because sometimes you might not be in the right role or you might not be in the right environment, and that's okay. But a lot of times we tend to conform first versus really being ourselves or really trying to discover who we are. So I like that you said that. Thank you for that.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And so when you think about well, I think it'll be helpful first off define introversion. What is that? How do you define that?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think this is very important too, because so many people don't know what the words introvert and extrovert mean.
Hmm.
They hear introvert and they say, oh, that's the quiet person, that's the shy person, that's the person that doesn't want to speak up. And the reality is it's really about stimulus. So someone that is introverted is typically going to draw more energy from time alone. They're typically going to be more productive in time alone or in smaller groups, where someone that's extroverted, they draw more energy from being around people. That's typically where their energy comes from. And when they're by themselves for too long, then that takes energy away from them. So that's really what it is. And it's just funny to me because a lot of people don't realize that, like former President Barack Obama is an introvert, but you see him, on stages and you saw him leading the country and people would just assume, oh, only an extrovert does that. Well, that's not the case, right? Because it's just about stimulus. It's not to say that introverts are afraid to speak or never want to be around people. That's just not the case.
Mm. So I'm hearing introversion's about energy. It's about, do you get your energy from, the internal, I guess, versus the external. And there are also people who are like omniverts, where it's like a little bit
Yep.
of both, right? Have you explored that? Okay.
Yep.
And so one thing I'll say about introverts is that sometimes that people think that introverts are worse public speakers or worse speakers of, in general, like when it's not about skill set, it's not about like the quality of the actual act. To your point, it's about where that person gets energy from. And so I wanted to make sure we answer that question because there are also the biases sometimes against when we talk about introversion. um One thing that pops up to me related to this manifestation in the workplace is conflict, and it makes me think about, because you got to work with people,
Yep.
and when you run into conflict as an introvert, would you say they're better at handling conflict, worse? Like, how would you characterize that?
Yeah, I love this question. So conflict is interesting because a lot of people hear that word and they just automatically go to the negative. I'm one of those where I believe that some conflict is healthy,
Hmm.
And there's other conflict that can be toxic, right? I'll say that from an introvert versus extrovert perspective, oftentimes the more introverted person is going to be a little more introspective and they're going to think a little more, where the extrovert oftentimes is going to kind of say the first thing that's on their mind, or they're going to talk to think, right? Where an
Mm.
introvert is going to think to talk. So in conflict situations, oftentimes what happens, and I call it like the 5 second rule. A lot of people do not adhere to the 5 second rule, which is something that, my dad told me about growing up, where when you're in a situation where you begin to feel an emotion or you begin to feel heated or just things are going in a wrong direction, wait a few seconds before reacting. So most people just react first, right? So in conflict type situations, let's say that it's a meeting at work and somebody says something to a coworker that is just out of line, like their tone, their delivery, everything is just out of line, right? Someone that is a little more maybe extroverted or is just going to say the first thing on their mind, they may say something they could never take back. They may say something that is not going to allow that conflict to progress in the right direction,
And
right?
they're probably just thinking. They're probably just thinking out
Exactly.
loud, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hmm.
they may not, in their mind, they may not even be trying to escalate the argument,
Hmm.
but only just because they're talking to think, the first thing they say is going to come out, right? Where
Yep.
someone that's a little more reserved, a little more patient, that person might say that same thing. And although it might impact them, they may not like it, they may listen to that, pause for a few seconds, and then respond. Those few
Hmm.
seconds can be huge. And I've seen it because I do it. And I know other fellow introverts that do the same thing. And it's actually a skill that you can learn. It's one of the things
Right.
that I talk about in my upcoming book, where just the importance of patience. And when you're in those moments of conflict, you notice the conflict for what it is. You see it, you notice the tone, and then you choose your response. You don't let someone else dictate your response for you. So I think that a lot of times introverts are better suited for conflict in that way.
Just naturally. Um,
Yep.
yeah, naturally. But as you said, we all can learn that behavior of the 5 second rule and taking that time to think before we respond. And another thing that I've seen extroverts do really well, even, when I coach them, at least, I just experienced this before, was I tell extroverts, if you're thinking out loud, tell the other party, hey, I'm just thinking out loud. Like be very specific of what you're doing. Um, because that goes a long way in preserving the relationship versus an introvert having their assumptions of, oh, if you said it, that means you thought about it before.
Right.
Right? Because the
Right.
extrovert, they probably haven't thought about it before. They're literally thinking about it right now. Whereas sometimes I know a lot of introverts, including myself, when we say something, I've been thought about it, like that. That's when I say it, because I've
Right.
thought it through probably for days, and then I finally say it. I'm not looking to brainstorm now because I already did it. So it's just a different
Yeah.
way. But when we don't have like conversations around about these mental model differences, an extrovert's gonna assume somebody else is an extrovert, and an introvert's gonna assume somebody else is an introvert. So it's important to have these conversations.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So my next question is, the Toxic Leadership Podcast is global now, and we do a lot of work talking about different workplace cultures and helping employees through those things. And one thing that comes up a lot is tips. People want tips. People want tips. I'm in this toxic work environment and stuff like that. Talk to me about that notion of calmness. How can I use calmness to my advantage, whether I'm an introvert or an extrovert? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So there's a few tips that I talk about in the upcoming book, and so the first is poise, and then we talk about patience, which I touched a little on,
Hmm.
connection, and relaxation.
Okay.
So when we talk about poise, we think about somebody that when they're in a situation where everyone is running around with their hair on fire, everything is going wrong. Those days where just nothing seems like it can go right.
Yeah.
It's the person that can sit in those moments and they have a certain clarity. They observe the situation, they focus on what's wrong, and they focus on solutions,
Mm.
right? So that alone, the ability to do that helps you to stay calm. And then when the leader is calm, the rest of the team is going to be calm.
Mm.
So having poise to where when things are going wrong, being able to observe what it is, come up with solutions to fix it. The next is when we talk about patience. And again, this just goes back to the conflict conversation. a lot of people, not just in the workplace, but in life in general, just lack patience, right? It's kind of the microwave society that we now have, where everyone wants an answer now. They want things done a certain way right now, and certain people are just not able to be patient. But a calm leader, someone that exhibits calmness, is able to wait. Like there are some times where I'll have things in my current role and it needs an answer really pretty soon. But sometimes the best answer, I don't need to give that answer right now. Because if you give me half of a day, I'll have a much clearer answer in a few hours, right? So being able to have that patience to recognize when you and your team maybe need to wait and talk things out before just doing the first thing that comes to mind. And then connection. So connection is very important as well. So a lot of times when people are at conflict, or teams aren't working well together, or there's a toxic environment, there's a lack of connection there. A lot of times there's a lack of connection. So, here's an example. There are some people that I work with here recently that have lost some loved ones. And I had no idea about it. And it's interesting because one of them in some of the meetings here a few weeks ago, they were being a little, I'll say short with people, and their tone was coming off a certain way. And I had a conversation with them offline. I started to realize, oh, they've got some things going on.
Right.
So some people, when you don't connect with your teammates, you don't connect with people, there's certain things that you're going to miss. And so you begin to build a certain empathy. You begin to build a certain connection. Like there are things there that I think help to flip certain environments that might be toxic. Now, some people are just going to be toxic and it is what it is. So in some situations, that's a different scenario. But oftentimes, we're just not connecting with each other. And it makes for these environments where we're just not, able to work well together. And then last is just relaxing. A lot of people are not calm because they never take the time to relax. We just constantly just go, go, go. We constantly work. We don't take time to recharge, to break away. And so I talk about that in the book as well, just the importance of being able to truly unplug and recharge.
And it's almost like, relaxation sometimes is like a muscle you got to grow.
Absolutely.
And, you have to practice that through behavior, the behavior repetition and habits. I like that. I like how you framed everything, because it really talks about that notion of like pausing, and how pausing and assessing is not a weakness, because that allows you to check in with people, and allows you to check in with yourself, allows you to check in with the situation. I like that, because we've tended to view productivity and efficiency as speed. And you know what I mean? Like if it looked like I'm working fast, if it looked like I'm doing things, I look productive. I look like I'm killing it,
Yes.
And that's not true at all. And it's a pressure, to be honest. There's a time pressure in a lot of work environments to appear productive and to appear busy. And sometimes people don't pause because of that too, in the culture.
Yeah, and that gets very dangerous, right? Because when we put the emphasis on speed, and sometimes things do need to be done quick, and sometimes there are deadlines, that's part of it. But there are other times where I would rather wait a day for something to be completed if I know it's going to be right. Then I get it a day early, and then it's wrong, and we spend more time reworking it and talking about it than if it would have just, waited the day.
Just waited.
Right? So,
No, I learned that personally from people I worked with. I'm the type. So everybody think about it. Okay, so if you get a project, when do you start working on the project? Let's say you got a month deadline. When do you start working on it? Some people start 4 weeks ahead. As soon as you get it to me, they're gonna start it. Some people wait, maybe a week. Some people wait 2 weeks. Some people wait till the last week. Okay, so I used to work with people that waited maybe 3 weeks or the last week. I'm going to start as soon as I heard about it. I'm going to at least start. And one thing that I learned, because I used to have these talks and ask, why do you start your project so late? Conversation came up well, I like to make sure, because new stuff comes up, maybe within 3 weeks, I might hear something new. I might, and that might make my output much better. And so having these conversations and learning that people, all behavior makes perfect sense. I say that all the time. They made perfect sense. I start early because I don't want to fall behind on other stuff. So it made perfect sense to me. Nothing's really wrong. It's just different. And so I think to that notion of hurrying and rushing and stuff like that, have these kinds of conversations with your staff, with your team, because the whole point of introversion, extroversion, and all of that is how do we coexist together, and use the strengths of each other. And I think that's really, really helpful if we talk about building like effective teams or optimal teams. What's been your experience of like you working cohesively with other people, maybe extroverts? Like, do you have any examples of like you sharing, like, because we talked about knowing yourself. So
Hmm.
now that you know yourself, how do you stick to your strengths? When you need to. How have you had that conversation with someone that's different when you're trying to like be yourself and be authentically you in your gifts?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So, in my industry, being in defense, the
Hmm.
majority of people that I work with are more on the extroverted side.
Okay.
That's just the majority of them. And, I think that some of it, I'm actually thinking about an individual right now. It's just a natural flow that happens. Like they
Mm,
begin to understand your demeanor, and then I begin to understand their demeanor, right? So, for example, when I'm working with somebody that's former military and they're used to a certain way of doing things and they're
yeah.
very vocal, very outgoing, like being around people, all of that. But then they see me in the way that I work and I'm just as productive, but the way I do it might be different.
Hmm.
Like the individual that I'm thinking about, I mean, we've had conversations in the past. We were on a very challenging program. And he used to say to me all the time, he's like, "Man, Terrence, I don't know how you were so calm with all this. Like, how do you keep it together?" I mean, because it
uh,
was a crazy program. But at the same time, I also appreciated him because he was very, again, vocal about certain things. And there were times that actually that was needed.
yeah.
And the way that he did it, though, he would do it in a respectful way. He didn't do it in a way that was belittling to anyone on the team or anything like that. Um, but he was very, I'll say, like encouraging and really helped to push the team forward. So I think
Mm,
that his approach and my approach working together worked really well, and we understood that about each other. So
mm,
yeah, and I always say I don't think there's anything. Um, it's not that introversion is better or extroversion is better,
yeah.
right?
Right.
I think we're just all different. We're all humans, the way that we operate and interact, and it's just about understanding each other.
Yeah. And it has me thinking about the notion of, because you talked about how you coexist with others, but like one thing that exists before we get to know each other is like the bias of like, oh, this person who might be introverted, they're not a team player because they don't go to like external events with other folks, or maybe they're just quiet, or they don't talk up in the lunchroom as much. And people might have assumptions that like, oh, you don't want to know about us, so you don't care about us, when it could be further from the truth in a lot of cases.
Yep.
And so I want you to answer this question in two different frames. I want to hear what would you want extroverts to know? That's first. And then second, I want to ask, how do you coach introverts to like, you know, not get that bias, not get that false perception. So first off, what do you want extroverts to know about introverts as we think about building teams and building relationships?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. This is a very important question because it's a bias that's very common.
Hmm.
In the workplace, there are get togethers after work, there are happy hours, there are lunches, there are all these different things that happen. And if somebody doesn't show up, or if someone, is never around, there's this assumption like, oh, that person's an introvert, they're antisocial or whatever.
Antisocial. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like that's the word that gets thrown around,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And what I would say to extroverts is that if somebody does not come to every single thing or someone isn't always attending, it doesn't mean that they just never want to socialize with you. It doesn't mean they're antisocial. It doesn't mean they're quiet or anything. It just means that their energy might be different from your energy. That's all. Some people, they want to go to a get together with their coworkers 5 times a week, whereas someone else, they may just be okay with going twice a month, and that works for them. And so it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that person or they're
Right.
antisocial. That's what I would want extroverts to know about that.
Yeah. So on the flip side, how do you coach an introvert? Let's say I'm getting a new job, or let's say I got put on a new team, and I like people. I don't, I like people.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with people. It just doesn't energize me. how do you coach them in those kinds of situations?
Absolutely. So the word there is balance. The key is balance. Um, there's a there's a pendulum, right, with this. So for some introverts, they hear the word network and they say, "Oh my God, that means I've got to go to all of these events and meet all these people and always be around people." And then on the other side, there's the introvert that says, "Well, I'm not going to do any of it. Like, I want to go home. I want to do my work. I want to go home and not be around anybody and be in my bubble." There's issues with both, right? The issue with the first approach is you're not going to protect your energy that way. You're going to get burned out. It's going to be too much. And eventually you're just going to no longer want to go. It's going to do too much to you. On the flip side, though, if you never go to anything, I can tell you some of the most powerful relationships that I've had, people that I've met that have literally changed my career, changed my business, the things that I do from day to day. There are people that I have met when I went to some event that I did not feel like going to. So ironically, there have been times where, yeah, I didn't feel like going, but guess what? I went and I made some connection. I had some conversation with somebody that ended up getting me a speaking engagement, or it ended up, I met somebody and they knew 20 people that wanted to buy my book. Or, I have so many examples of that. So there's power in showing up. And so I would just say, finding your balance, right? So maybe it's that there are 4 events in a month and you say to yourself, you know what, that's a little much, but I'm going to do 2. I'm going to choose to show up, but I'm not going to overdo it to where it's going to cause me to not be able to recharge and be too much. So it's just it's a balance thing.
I love that. There are times where I'm literally at an event and I gotta go hide away somewhere because I'm like, I gotta like I'm like, hey, let me dip out real quick. I'm gonna go sit over here. I gotta go hide away because I'll be in my energy drain will just happen. I don't know what's happening. It's just like, boom, I'm done. My battery's done. I'm off. And so I gotta hide away sometimes. And there have been times where I'm the one on stage and I don't do the mingling afterwards sometimes because I'm like, I'm fully drained. I did my part, I'm over here, talk to me over here, one-on-one type situations. I'm also married to an extrovert. And one of the things I learned, that comment you made about like, there are times you don't want to go, but you've learned, you've met somebody, you had a connection, you had a great time.
Yep.
I tell my wife all the time, I don't want to go to like anything, to be honest. Like there's like not a lot, especially if it's big crowds and stuff like that. But then I always have a good time. It's just, again, my innate predisposition is like, nah, too big, too many crowds, too many people. I don't want to talk to nobody. That's just my innate predisposition. But like what I want to illustrate to folks is like there are behaviors that we all can learn to be more sociable, and or if I'm an extrovert, and because extroverts get drained too. Right. So if I'm an extrovert and get drained, how can you buffer that yourself too? So I think the name of the game here, it sounds like, are really what are the behaviors that folks can like adopt to get them to where they want to be. And it sounded like, to be honest, you got to define what you want to get. What's your destination? What do you want? I want to be more sociable on my team. I want my personality to be my work personality. I want to show up what's most comfortable to me. Whatever that might be, define what your goal is first. So when we think about leadership, there's this notion of leadership having to be there. Even in the research, they talk about something called charismatic leadership. That's literally a thing. And to that point of leadership has constantly been framed as an extroverted activity. Talk to me about a calm leader. What makes somebody a calm leader? And, just give us a different view of leadership, especially as we all have mental models of what leaders are. So share with me what that looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for this question, I'll give an example of 2 different leaders. And what I'll say is that these are program managers that I've worked with in the past who were very different as far as their personalities, but both very effective.
Okay.
So the first one is a program manager that was very talkative, is the way that I'll put it. very talkative. Um, you were not going to catch her not talking in a meeting or things like that.
Okay.
However, also very engaging with her team and very
Mm,
respectful of her team. Like the
mm,
thing about her is she would be talking, but she was always asking a lot of questions because she wanted to actually hear and listen to the thoughts of the people she worked with. So
mm,
she wasn't, one of these people where she would just be asking questions because she just wanted to hear herself talk and she didn't really care about the answers and she would just kind of run the show. No, she made it a very engaging environment. And she's actually the person that gave me one of my first leadership positions on this particular program.
mm.
So she had a lot of respect for me, a lot of respect for the people that she worked with, but very charismatic, very outgoing, always wanted to be around people, talking a lot and everything like that. Now, there was another person, and he was very different.
Mm.
So with him, he would oftentimes be in meetings and he may not say anything for the first like 20 minutes of the meeting. Like he would just be sitting in there and people are briefing and presenting things and all of that. And then when he said something, it was almost like he was just sitting there the whole 20 minutes observing everything going on, taking mental notes. And he would just be like, okay, what about this? What about that? What about this? And
Mm.
I mean, he would have these brilliant questions, right? And that was just his approach and the way he was. Not a super sociable person. I mean, social, but
Yeah.
not the type that was going to be at every lunch and every single thing, right? Um, very just calm demeanor, but also very well respected and, just highly respected is
Mm.
what I can say. So, two very different people. And I say that to say this. Oftentimes, people would look at that first leader that I described and they would say, oh, well, she's the charismatic leader. She should be
Mhm,
the leader of the organization.
mhm,
And where I challenge that is I say that it's not that she can't be, because no, she was amazing, but the second person can as well,
mm,
right?
mhm,
So it's not that one is right and one is wrong. Again, back to the introvert extrovert thing. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. I think as a society where we've made a mistake is we've just automatically assumed that people need to be extroverted and that's the right answer. And we associate that with leadership.
mm,
And the reality is, and the reason I have my platform and I'm so passionate about what I do, is I want to show people that no, there's also a right answer over here too. Someone that's an introvert, someone that's more laid back in the way that they operate, they can also be a leader and they can also excel as well. So, yeah, it's not that one is right and one is wrong.
absolutely, absolutely. And I like how you shared both sides of that because the way you framed it, I can see leadership qualities in both people. And it's not one that's right, it's one that's wrong. It's just, do we have the systems and the processes to tease that out? Like what are those, what are those unique skill sets and stuff like that? Because I've also met plenty of folks who like were extroverted, but they weren't effective in like the work. um
Right.
you know what I mean, like you just talking,
Right.
like
Yeah.
and right. So
Yeah.
then we have to be, and we, again, we are biased towards the talking. I mean, we're biased, like we're even biased towards how loud you talk, I'm gonna say, like in some scenarios, like in meetings and stuff like that. And so I'm liking how we're dispelling these myths and we're dispelling, conventional wisdom with the fact that like you can there's leadership traits in all. um so let's talk about, if you had to give us some advice, like what words of wisdom would you tell us of, of as we wrap up and think about introverted leadership and being calm as a leader and stuff like that? What words of wisdom do you have for us?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I would say, like, for the audience, for people that are listening, and we talked earlier about authenticity and being yourself. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you that that pressure to be more of an extrovert, because so many people assume that extroversion is tied to leadership. Early on in my career, I felt that pressure.
Hmm.
I did. And there were times where I gave into that pressure. There were times where I went to certain events I didn't feel like going to. There were times where I felt like I had to speak a different way or be something different other than what I was. And I gave into some of that at times. And so, my word of wisdom to everybody, again, saying be yourself, it sounds very surface level. And so I don't want to say just be yourself, but I will say lean into who you are. like just lean into who you are. Don't feel like you have to be like anyone else. Because that's what I thought. Like for a long time early in my career, I thought that leadership just was not me because of what I associated it with. Just like you said, where society associates extroversion with leadership so often. When I realized that it's not that leadership is about extroversion, leadership can be leadership regardless of whatever my personality is, right? So when you begin to realize that and lean into who you are, then that's where the true power comes. So I think that's what my word of wisdom would be.
Got it. And so we have I know you have your website, and folks, we have the Introvert Leader. We got your website there on the screen. Feel free to utilize the QR code to access it. Talk to us about your books and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. So, Quiet Voice, Fearless Leader, 10 Principles for Introverts to Awaken the Leader Inside. That's available in paperback, ebook, and audio. So that's been, awesome. Released that in October 2021. And to date, it's, over 10,000 copies sold, over 8 countries. And the follow-up to that, The Calm Effect, 5 Secrets for Introverts to Succeed Without Stress and Lead with Poise. That'll be coming out here within the next month. So very excited about that. I've actually been very busy doing work to get that ready. So
Okay.
yeah, excited about that one.
That's nice. That's nice. And I'm happy to see you're still you're writing books, because that's filling your cup, I would imagine,
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah, that's
It
good.
is.
That's really good. And share your Instagram to folks too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So anyone follow me on Instagram. It's at the Introvert Leader. So that's where I'm most active, and I'm also active on YouTube as well. So my channel is at the Introvert Leader on YouTube. So definitely subscribe.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we put that in the notes, show notes and such. But I really had a great time talking with you again today. And I really want to thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. This is a great conversation, just like it was the first time we did it.
Yeah,
So I definitely
absolutely.
enjoyed it.
And I want to share, folks. You have 2 introverts right now on a live stream doing social media in an extroverted world, because consulting, I'm learning, is super extroverted. So like, at least that's what I feel. But like, it's possible, and I think one of the biggest things that you said today, and I think folks should take away, is we all have different personalities, but we all have the ability to engage in all behavior. And how do we access that, and do we recognize? And that's our power. That's our power, is what we do. Because you can't really change your personality. So as much as we try to, we can fake it, but I don't know. But no, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So that was great. I want to thank folks for viewing this and watching us today. I'm gonna be able to have plenty of conversations with Terrence. We're connected on Instagram. That's actually where I get met. This is a great show, and I'm introverted, so I always like to hear tips, because that's just something that, like, I've for years had to do the whole fake it to make it, or at least I felt I had to do that. But until I started really living into like what gives me energy and what drains my energy, that's when I became actually more effective in the work that I do. And so Terrence is like a great testament to being who you truly are. And I like that lesson learned for today. So anyway, thanks for watching the show. This is Working Wisdom with Dr. Kevin Sansberry. We'll be back. We got some episodes coming up. Check us out on LinkedIn. Click on events. When you go to my page, you'll be able to see all the next live streams that are coming up. We got a lot of great guests this season. Also, check out the Toxic Leadership Podcast on every platform, including your like voice things you got in your house. You can just say, hey, I want to listen to that podcast. You can ask and it'll find it. Yeah, thanks for viewing the show. I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry.